All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Surviving a Bust, Crypto, NFTs, and Insolvency. My name is Kebeh, and I'll be your moderator today. For this panel, we've got three really knowledgeable panelists in Gary Kohn, Robert Honeywell, and Kathy Phelps. Kathy is a partner at Rains Feldman, where she practices in the areas of insolvency law, fiduciary representation, and fraud litigation. Robert is a partner at K&L Gates, where he practices in the area of bankruptcy litigation and structured finance transactions. And finally, Gary runs his own firm where he practices entertainment and corporate law. So this panel is not necessarily designed to have materials, but if you're really interested in the discussion that we have today, we've distributed a really detailed article that Kathy wrote specifically about issues relating to cryptocurrency and bankruptcy. So you should get a message or so in the chat box about that, about where you can access that article and check it out for yourself. As far as questions, if you have any questions, please put those in the Q&A box, not the chat function. We'll look at the end to try to catch all the questions, even if they're in the chat function, but it's easier for us to see them if they're in the Q&A section, and we'll get to those at the end. As you know, these panelists are here to talk crypto, talk NFTs and the metaverse and bankruptcy. But before we go into the details, let's just go over the basics a little bit. Gary, the first question is for you. What are cryptocurrencies? What is a cryptocurrency? What are NFTs? What is the metaverse?
Thank you, Mo. Pleasure to be here today. As you may know, NFTs and the metaverse have captured everyone's attention. In order to understand NFTs and the metaverse, let's first address cryptocurrency. Also known as crypto, cryptocurrency is a form of digital currency. Think of cryptocurrency as virtual coins. These virtual coins are transferred between parties without going through financial institutions. Cryptocurrency transactions are not verified by banks, but by computers that have access to a digital ledger called the blockchain. Currently, there are hundreds of cryptocurrencies, the most popular being Bitcoin and Ethereum. NFT purchases are paid for in cryptocurrency, usually Ethereum, also called ETH. So what is an NFT? NFT stands for non-fungible token. Something fungible can be exchanged for something else of the same kind. For example, a dollar bill is fungible. You can trade a dollar bill for another dollar bill, and you have exactly the same thing. Something non-fungible cannot be replaced with something else, which means it's unique. A signed Kobe Bryant basketball is non-fungible. If you trade it for another basketball, you would have something completely different. Tokens, also known as cryptographic tokens, reside on the blockchain. A token is programmed into an NFT and represents a unique asset. So think of NFTs as digital assets, which can include items such as avatars, artwork, photographs, and sound recordings. The token and the digital asset it represents are located in different places. The token is on the blockchain and contains information where the asset can be found. The token is connected to the digital asset via a data link that points to where the NFT is stored. NFTs have a terminology all of their own. One popular NFT term is minting, which means to develop an NFT. Another NFT associated term is drop, which refers to the launch of an NFT. So we know an NFT is a digital asset represented by a token that lives on the blockchain. So what is the blockchain? The blockchain is a public database where transactions are visible. The database is not controlled by a centralized entity, but is shared across a network of computers called nodes. The database cannot be changed without more than half the nodes agreeing to a change. Once a blockchain transaction is verified by the nodes, the transaction is placed in a block. Each new transaction block is positioned in order of verification below the previous block, forming a chain of blocks, thus the blockchain. To put the NFT craze into perspective, the NFT market value for 2022 is estimated to be $35 billion, and over 80 billion by 2025. NFTs are now being used in connection with another new and exciting sensation, the metaverse. The word metaverse means beyond this universe. The metaverse is a three-dimensional virtual world where users can shop, work, interact, play, and experience as they would in the real world. Using virtual reality, VR, and augmented reality, AR, users can immerse into this world and interact with objects and people projected in front of them in real time. Almost all versions of the metaverse include the use of VR, AR, and avatars connected by a massive network. VR is the use of computer technology to create a simulated environment which can be explored in 360 degrees. VR relies on the use of headsets and controllers to permit interaction with the virtual world. AR is technology that presents virtual objects in our field of vision and can be used with a smartphone. If you like acronyms, the metaverse uses VR and AR in combination with AI, artificial intelligence, to create accurate virtual worlds. So how is commerce transacted in the metaverse? This is where NFTs and the blockchain come into play. There's an entire digital economy in the metaverse where transactions involve the exchange of NFTs and cryptocurrency. NFTs are used to purchase real estate, goods, and services in the metaverse, and they are paid for with cryptocurrency in transactions on the blockchain. It is predicted in the future that the market value for the metaverse could top $8 trillion. So that's a brief overview of cryptocurrency, NFTs, and the metaverse.
Thanks for that, Gary. Very, very robust description for us. Appreciate that. So let's get a little bit into the details about some of the cryptocurrency related bankruptcies that we've seen most recently, that being Voyager and Celsius. Robert, could you kind of explain for us what these entities are and how they ended up in bankruptcy?
Sure, Mo. Thanks, and thanks, Gary, for that. I have to hear a description of what this is every single time because it's moving so fast and it still is mind-blowing to me. And I can tell you, having listened to the hearings of Celsius and Voyager customers, that their minds are blown also in the wrong way. It happened so fast. Basically, what they were, or kind of are, is platforms where they asked retail customers out there to park their crypto assets on their trading platforms. And in the case of Celsius and Voyager did the same thing. They had what they called earn reward programs, where if you transferred, and I use that word very carefully, transferred your crypto assets to them, you had an account with them, and they made it very easy to use, and they had little apps on their phones, so tons of people use them. And if you transferred your crypto assets to them, they would give you a return, a percentage, what they called an earned reward. That sounds great so far. And in Celsius, they even made it very, very trendy by saying, unbank with us. That was their big phrase. And it was basically kind of the ethos of the web and the crypto universe is stick it to the man, stick it to the big banks, do it with us. Well, sounds great, but the problem is, how do they match that yield? How do they match that those percentage returns? They invest it. Where do they invest it? That's the number one question, or should I say several billion-dollar question, because Voyager invested it a lot in institutional loans to third parties, other crypto outfits, the most significant of which is an entity called 3 Arrows Capital, which was organized in the British Virgin Islands, who promptly basically liquidated. Their founders are fleeing, they're somewhere in Asia, and the BVI and 3 Arrows went into a BVI liquidation proceeding, and the liquidators are literally chasing these guys all over the world. And the problem is they owe a lot of money to Voyager. And so Voyager suddenly found that one of the main ways they, quote, deploy crypto evaporated. And so their income stream couldn't serve the returns to the customers. Celsius had a similar story. They took in billions of dollars in crypto assets from customers all over the world. They, quote, deployed it to various loans, mining operations, and other activities. And then when the crypto markets crashed, particularly Terra Luna, when it crashed, people started panicking, and they basically had runs on the bank of their accounts in Celsius and Voyager. And so they panicked and they shut the gates down, and then they ended up filing bankruptcy. So that's sort of the very brief version of what happened. And now they're trying to figure out what in the world to do. Celsius has basically shut down its retail operations. Voyager is busy selling the company as we speak. They just extended the bid deadline, and they're trying to get some value for what they've got, which is a platform, and then whatever they can get out of that sale, give it to the customers. That's Voyager. Celsius is thinking about doing that. Their main value, they claim, is in their Bitcoin mining operation, which is set up in Texas, and it's sort of half built and very expensive to run. And they say that's the promised land. They're going to make a ton of money off mining Bitcoin. And once they do that, which they expect to be once they start turning a profit, which they expect to be sometime in next year, then they'll give the money to the customers. In the meantime, you have a lot of incredibly angry, despairing customers. I've been practicing bankruptcy for 30 years, and I've never seen more individual letters filed on the bankruptcy docket. Just painful, incredible stories, people who invested their life savings because these returns were incredible, and now they wonder if they're going to get it back. And then they're finding out that in spite of these platforms sort of looking, acting, smelling like brokers and banks, lo and behold, they find out they're just general unsecured creditors. And in bankruptcy speak, that's what sort of gives a shudder to people like us, because that means you're at the bottom of the totem pole and you don't have a secured position, you don't have any solid guarantee that you're going to get your money back. You just sort of hope that they collect. So that's essentially what's happening in Celsius and Voyager. Very fast-moving, fluid cases. They hope to recover assets for these folks, and I can guarantee you that one of the main assets in both cases is going to be litigation. They're going to be suing people right and left for what did they do with all the customers' property? Where did it go? Why didn't you hedge against it? Why didn't you reserve for it? So it's going to be a very intense, very active case, particularly this fall.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. That sounds like a terrible situation, to say the very least. No, now that we're actually talking about the bankruptcy and bankruptcy in general, let's back up a little bit. And Kathy, could you give us a quick bankruptcy crash course for those attendees that don't practice or are not familiar? Who files bankruptcy? What's going on here? What does the process look like?
Sure, a quick crash course in crypto and bankruptcy, because not bankruptcy in general. We'll be here for days.
All right.
So cryptocurrency and digital assets can land in a bankruptcy proceeding in a few different ways, depending on who filed the bankruptcy and how the asset is held. And that second piece of it, let me back up just a little bit and let's talk about what crypto is, right? It uses a digital signature mechanism, and that generates a public key and a private key, which is kind of important, and they're mathematically related. The public key identifies a user and is kind of like an account username, and the private key is a string of characters that serves as a password and identifies the owner of the wallet where the crypto is held, and that allows the user to access and transfer the digital assets. So digital wallets store cryptocurrencies, and owners can exchange cryptocurrencies over the internet directly from peer to peer. Miners are the computer operators who use software to validate the transactions, and they are then awarded cryptocurrency as they solve these mathematical puzzles to add new blocks to the blockchain. So that's all relevant for what I'm going to talk about now, right? So the cryptocurrency exchanges are the places that facilitate the exchange of cryptocurrencies. And so the question then becomes, who filed bankruptcy when we want to think about, well, how is cryptocurrency and digital assets, how are they ending up in bankruptcy? So if it's an individual that owns the asset, right? They are the holder of maybe a cold wallet where they hold the private and the public keys themselves and it's offline. That becomes property of a bankruptcy estate. They may have an interest in a hot wallet, a wallet that's connected to the internet. And depending on how that hot wallet account is held with an exchange, they may have a differing interest in it. So if an individual files bankruptcy, whatever interest they have in cryptocurrency, however held, wherever held, that is an asset of that individual's bankruptcy case. That's sort of the easy part of the discussion. So we're not really going to talk so much about that today. The question becomes when an exchange files bankruptcy or when some type of an investment fund files bankruptcy, like we're seeing in Celsius and Voyager, the issues become a lot more complex. So this exchange is this platform that's offering the customers the ability to buy, to sell, to trade cryptocurrencies. And through an exchange, a customer can have that asset held through a non-custodial wallet or a custodial wallet. So if it's a non-custodial wallet, you maintain sole control over the private key and the public key. And so those assets really are still within your control. If it's a custodial wallet, then another party is controlling the private keys. Now, most custodial wallets these days are web-based exchange wallets, like we see with a Celsius or with like a Coinbase, for example. Now, there is no SIPC or FDIC insurance for assets that are held at a cryptocurrency exchange. So if the exchange ends up in a bankruptcy proceeding, you may not have the same protections that you might otherwise have if you were just at a bank, a financial institution with cash, or a brokerage firm with securities. So another bankruptcy issue that might come up in these cases is whether or not the entity that filed is eligible to file, right? Under Section 109 of the Bankruptcy Code, there are some entities that are not eligible to file, like banks, insurance companies, and railroads, for example. So the question of whether a company filing bankruptcy qualifies and might be a bank that is otherwise not eligible, or whether you have an institution that does some banking and also is a custodian of cryptocurrency, are the lines going to get blurred there? Are we going to see some eligibility issues? I don't know. But the really interesting question, and the one that we're seeing really active right now, is who owns the cryptocurrency in bankruptcy when an exchange files, right? So unlike a brokerage firm where you can look at your brokerage statement and say, oh, I own 100 shares of Microsoft, right? Presumably that Microsoft, it is reflected on the cap table of Microsoft that you are the owner of that company. That is an identifiable interest, so you own that particular asset. That's very different if a custodial account is held at an exchange. And so these assets are fungible, they are commingled, depending on what the custodial relationship is with the company. You may or may not have a separate identifiable interest there. Once the company, the exchange ends up in bankruptcy, whether that custodial account of the customer remains property of the customer or becomes the exchange's property may depend on some factors, right? What was the intent of the parties? What was the fine print of the agreement, of the user agreement with the exchange? Are that customer's assets commingled with other assets? Are they segregated? Is there a unique key available to just that particular customer? Who has control of the assets? So on the one hand, if title doesn't really belong to the customer and the exchange is holding those assets in a commingled way, they're probably going to be assets of the exchange. If there's some type of an arrangement where the particularly identifiable assets are being held in trust and those are traceable, maybe the customer would prevail on that type of an argument. So there's a real question, and it may also be a question of whether there was fraud or mismanagement involved in the case, and there simply aren't enough assets left. There's a whole body of law out there that says even if you can trace and you could establish a trust, given the circumstances and similarly situated defrauded victims, a court might find that no one's going to be able to trace and everyone's just going to be a pro rata unsecured creditor. So the question then turns to, well, all right, so if you're one of these customers / maybe creditor, how can you maximize what you're going to get out of a bankruptcy situation, right? So again, you've got this first question of what type of an account is it? Is it non-custodial or is it custodial? Can you establish as a customer a unique traceable interest to a particular digital asset, right? If so, maybe you can get an in-kind return of whatever that asset is. Given the fungible nature of digital assets, tracing is probably going to be problematic for most customers if your interest is through a custodial account in the exchange. You know, it was interesting, and if any of you want to read the materials, I looked at, I was kind of curious, I looked at Coinbase's user agreement that's available on its website. And I found the language that was being represented a little bit confusing for customers, right? Because on the one hand, it said assets are fungible, right? Users agree that Coinbase may hold assets on a shared blockchain addresses, and the digital assets held across multiple blockchain addresses may be treated as fungible. All right, well, that's not so good for the customer. But then it says in another place, all digital assets we hold for digital asset wallets are held for customers, are not property of Coinbase, and are not subject to claims of Coinbase's creditors. Well, that kind of cuts the other way and sounds, well, okay, maybe that is my property. And then there's another section of the user agreement that says that everything is commingled, right? So when you're reading the user agreement, you know, if you're the user, it's a little bit confusing. Well, just this past May, Coinbase in its Form 10Q that it filed with the SEC buried this statement in the middle of this filing. They said, because custodial held crypto assets may be considered to be property of a bankruptcy estate, in the event of a bankruptcy, the crypto assets we hold in custody on behalf of our customers could be subject to bankruptcy proceedings, and such customers could be treated as our general unsecured creditors, right? So that just puts it right out there that even though we represented on the user agreement that these are your assets and you have title to them, in the event of a bankruptcy, that might get turned on its head. So the question then becomes, if you are treated as an unsecured creditor in the bankruptcy of an exchange, how is that going to pan out, right? And maybe that's going to depend on whether the bankruptcy case is a Chapter 11 or a Chapter 7 and wants to do any ongoing business, right? If the exchange wants to stay in business and they're doing a Chapter 11 reorganization, maybe they're going to try to hold on to those assets and propose a plan for distributing or retaining those cryptocurrency assets. And maybe the customers would support that type of a plan because they're going to retain an interest in it. And the creditors, of course, are going to have an opportunity to vote on that plan of reorganization. Now, of course, they're going to have to wait some period of time for the debtor to propose a plan of reorganization, go through the confirmation process, you know, do all of the voting, determine whether it's feasible, and there's all kinds of issues there. Given the volatility in the valuations of cryptocurrency, whether or not Chapter 11 plans are going to be able to be confirmed in this regard, whether you can establish that they're feasible, you know, remains to be seen. In a Chapter 7 liquidation context, you know, there you probably got a company saying, all right, we quit, we just want to sell everything, allow these people's claims on a pro rata basis. You have to decide valuation questions there as of what date are you going to value their claims so that you're treating everyone on an apples to apples basis. You know, in a forced liquidation type of a scenario, there's also the risk that you're going to depress the value of those assets, and depending on the scope of that type of a liquidation, that could impact the markets, you know, really even globally. So it remains to be seen if anything is going to go down that path. So the recovery for a customer, if sort of trapped in all of this, might not be an in-kind return of digital assets, it might be treatment as an unsecured creditor to share pro rata with other customers. So a lot of this still remains to unwind itself, I think, in these cases that were just recently filed. Thanks
for that, Kathy. I noticed that you mentioned something about valuing the cryptocurrency assets that a creditor might believe that they or have a right to. Gary, can you explain to us if there's any sort of way to kind of gauge the average or expected value of, you know, a cryptocurrency portfolio or an NFT or anything like that? Is there any way for us to kind of know and understand what the value of something like that would be?
Well, unlike gold, which can be used for jewelry and industrial uses, cryptocurrency really has no intrinsic value. Cryptocurrency derives its worth from investor demand alone. That demand has grown rapidly in the last couple of years, and as you know, early investors have made a lot of money. When an NFT transaction closes, the NFT seller receives cryptocurrency in the form of Ethereum. That seller may choose to convert Ethereum to what's called fiat currency, which would be the applicable legal tender issued and backed by the government. Today, 1 ETH is the equivalent of approximately $1,550 US. So what about valuation of NFTs and digital assets? There is no source you can go to find out the fair market value of NFTs in the way you would with a share of Apple stock. The value of an NFT is based upon its perceived value. In other words, the value placed on an NFT by a buyer will determine the ultimate purchase price. Typically, NFTs are sold through online platforms or auction houses. The NFT sale that started the NFT phenomenon was made by a graphic designer named Mike Winkelmann, professionally known as Beeple. He sold an NFT for $69.3 million. Winkelmann created an image every day for 13 and a half years, and then designed an NFT representing a collage of his work. This NFT sale was facilitated by the prominent auction house Christie's. So in order to understand the perceived value of an NFT, we need to examine why anyone would purchase an intangible digital asset such as an NFT. It seems a bit far-fetched when you think about it. Some buyers purchase NFTs strictly for bragging rights. For example, a buyer may boast about having the only set of Tom Brady football trading cards. Other buyers are fans who treasure memorabilia, just like tangible items. Dodgers fans may have a signed Sandy Koufax baseball that they proudly display, but they would never sell. A whole nother group of buyers they purchase NFTs as investments. One buyer purchased an NFT for $67,000 and 4 months later sold it for $6.6 million. This was another Beeple NFT. So many view NFTs in the same way as sports rookie trading cards. And when buying an NFT, they believe that over time, the NFT will appreciate in value. Consequently, these buyers regard NFTs similar to publicly traded stocks, adhering to a strategy of buying low and selling high. One important way to add value to an NFT is through the use of what's called a smart contract. Smart contracts are not actually legal contracts. Smart contracts are programs in the form of computer code stored on the blockchain that run when predetermined conditions are met. A metaphor to explain a smart contract is a vending machine. With the correct input, a certain output is guaranteed. So to get a candy bar from a vending machine, the formula programmed into the vending machine would be money plus snack selection equals snack dispensed. A smart contract has logic programmed into it, similar to a vending machine. So a savvy creator of an NFT can customize a smart contract into the code of an NFT to permit a perpetual stream of royalty payments. Whenever the NFT is sold or resold on a secondary market, the creator or seller, without taking any further action, can receive a percentage of the sale proceeds from every subsequent sale. In theory, over time, a creator could potentially earn more from royalties than the initial purchase price of the NFT, especially if that NFT increases in value. So all that being said, the bottom line is there currently does not exist a scientific method to value an NFT or a digital asset.
Got it. Thanks, Gary. That's a little unfortunate for those who might want to dabble in investing in NFTs and the like, but I think we're going to have to give it some time before we can really figure out how to value these things. Going back to the Voyager and Celsius bankruptcies, Robert, could you tell us if there's any sort of way that people who have used these services, use these these coin-based funds, is there any way they can get more from their claims, or are they just stuck as with minimal returns as unsecured creditors?
My instinct as a lawyer is first to say who's asking. Uh, the reason I say that is on the surface, there's, I hate to say, not a lot you can do. Because if you've ever been involved in bankruptcy, all the bankruptcy lawyers know this. The second the bankruptcy is filed, boom, your claim is fixed. And it's going to be valued as of that day. And then you have a deadline to file a proof of claim called the bar date. If your claim is simple, and in this case, I've seen the claim in form in Voyager, it's relatively simple. It's just a list of coins, and you list how much your coins are. You file it before the deadline, and then you wait and hope for the best, and hope that the people who were court appointed to represent you, namely the Unsecured Creditors Committee, and technically the company itself, you hope that they will do their job and get you a great return. Like I said before, there are a few ways they're doing that in Voyager, mainly to sell the company or try to sell the company. And then there will probably be a litigation trust set up, and they will sue people for the next several years and try to get some more money for people. So that's a very passive approach. That's the sort of depressing approach because, yeah, there's not a lot to do other than file a claim and wait. Same in Celsius. They haven't set the bar date yet, but they will. Make sure to file your claim, list your coin in your account, and wait. If you happen to be a person with money, that's why I joked about who's asking, and really want to be active, then you could, ostensibly try to throw your weight around in the case, or at least lean on the creditors committee to do the right thing. But as far as I can tell, they're doing the right thing. They're being very aggressive so far, and push to be a part of the process, because the big kahuna here is, what's the plan? What's the exit plan? Kind of like what Kathy was saying earlier. Is it going to stay in business or not? Are they just going to liquidate? They're going to go into 11 or 7. Sometimes they liquidate inside an 11. We call that a liquidating 11. If you happen to be a big enough player, then you can really push the creditors committee to do the right thing. In some of these cases, they're forming ad hoc groups, which is another way of saying a creditors committee that's informal, doesn't get their fees paid by the company, and push it in the right direction, because what the plan says is going to be how people get paid, basically. And in Voyager, for example, they kind of surprised me. They filed a plan on the very first day, and I think it was to try to reduce panic by saying, you're going to get back a combination of crypto assets and Voyager coin. People weren't so thrilled about that. Voyager stock, they were even less thrilled about that. But that was just the beginning. So this plan will be in flux. So that's sort of, but to be able to really throw your weight around, to be able to throw your weight around in a case requires a lot of money and a big position. So that's why it seems like it's two extremes. The more interesting question to me is, what do you do to protect yourself before a company goes into bankruptcy? And Kathy alluded to that. And basically, the rule of thumb is read those damn contracts. Because I've also read the Coinbase contract, and as a bankruptcy lawyer with a specialty in investment accounts and securities and UCC Article 8, when I saw stuff in there where they were claiming that you are the owner and you have a quote securities account, I almost fell off my chair, because it's not a security until the court says it's a security. And a lot of you folks have probably heard that securities regulators all over the country are screaming at these companies saying, these earn accounts were unregistered securities, stop what you're doing. So basically, that's a way of saying, before you sign up on a platform, read the contract carefully. If you have enough weights, if you're a prime customer, try to negotiate it. And then as a practical matter, what Kathy was saying about hot wallets and cold wallets, what's on the platform, what's not. The rule of thumb generally is keep it in your own wallet, as much as you can. Go on the platform, then get back. Be very careful about leaving your stuff out there, because if they have it, they control it. I think what's the motto in crypto land? He who or she who has the keys controls the crypto. Like, if they are controlling the private key, they probably own it. Let's just be honest. It doesn't matter what they say. So be careful about what the contract says, keep it in a fully controlled wallet if you can. And then even better, if they have a custodial subsidiary like Coinbase has, maybe try to keep it parked there. But once it's on the platform and commingled, and it says commingled all over the contract, good luck if they go into bankruptcy. So bottom line is, in bankruptcy, file that claim, hope for the best. Outside of bankruptcy, dip in, get out, and read those contracts.
Read those contracts. Got it. Thanks, Robert. Moving on from that, this next question is for Kathy and Robert. Based on your bankruptcy experience and expertise, what sort of issues do you think NFTs will create in bankruptcy proceedings? I know we talked a little bit about crypto, but how would that be different when we're talking about non-fungible tokens? Does the SEC provide any sort of guidance as to how those should be treated?
Oh, so many questions, so much to talk about. Well, I'll start and Robert just jump in. Gary's just discussion about these smart contracts and the royalty stream, brings one right up, right? Who owns the NFT? And the copyright is staying with the creator of that NFT, and maybe they've built into a smart contract that there's this royalty stream, right? So an NFT is an asset that's got to get disclosed in a bankruptcy case, right? Well, what's the value of that? And if there is a future income stream, once that asset is in bankruptcy, that income stream presumably is also going to become property of the estate. Well, in a Chapter 7 case, that might impact eligibility, right? How you're valuing it and what the income stream is and how you're putting that into the mathematical equation. In a Chapter 13, that could impact the amount of Chapter 13 payments, right? So there's all kinds of issues that are going to come up, right? Just in terms of the ownership. I don't know. Do you have anything to add to that, Robert? I can carry on with other issues as well. So another issue that I see potentially coming up in bankruptcy cases is are NFTs used as collateral? Oh, he didn't have his headset on. And if so, how is a security interest perfected, and how is that going to withstand scrutiny in a bankruptcy case?
I'm having a technical issue.
Okay,
No
sorry. I know I asked you a question and you just sort of stared blankly at me, so I'll keep going. All right, so all different kinds of art, right? Sculptures, paintings, books, and other art forms are used as collateral, and it's really no different than an NFT. And more lenders are accepting NFTs as collateral as the NFT market continues to grow. I read somewhere that the NFT sales volume could top $90 billion by the end of this year, and it was $40 billion last year. And so that brings its whole really ecosystem of lenders and assets, into the equation. So how do you perfect a security interest in an NFT? And I'm not going to give anybody any legal advice on this because that's fraught with all kinds of issues. But generally speaking, NFTs don't appear to quite fit in the definition of artwork under the UCC. Artwork is really just sort of another good, and one would perfect an interest there. It's more likely that they would be considered as general intangibles, which is kind of the overflow bucket of the UCC when it's otherwise difficult to categorize collateral. Or it might be construed as investment property, which is a term that encompasses more securities and other security-like financial assets. So if an NFT is deemed to be a general intangible, then the path to perfection is a UCC1 financing statement. And where would that be filed? Well, probably in the state where the NFT owner is deemed to be located. But given the world of digital assets and NFTs and cryptocurrency, it all has an overlay of being anonymous and confidential. So a lender might actually find it difficult to know the precise filing, the jurisdiction of where to file a UCC1. If the NFT is labeled as investment property, then you might perfect differently, and a security interest in investment property is perfected by control. Right, so a lender can obtain control under the UCC if the NFT is deposited directly into that lender's wallet, but that might feel uncomfortable for the borrower. or if the NFT is transferred to a third party and an agreement is signed by the lender, the borrower, and the third party, almost an escrow type of a situation. The borrower grants the lender security interest in the NFT, but the NFT is held in a specific account or wallet by a third party, which can lead to a whole other issues of a set of issues, of course, when bankruptcy gets filed. So, on the lending front and perfection issues, I don't know that we've yet seen those arising in bankruptcy cases, but I can certainly see this category of issues on the horizon as NFTs start getting caught up in bankruptcy cases.
Absolutely.
I have other thoughts as well, but I wanted to give Robert a chance to answer any other issues in bankruptcy.
Yeah, with apology, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I had all of a sudden everything went quiet. I will apologize for that. The main thing with NFTs and bankruptcy, I haven't dealt with it yet, but when we were preparing for this, back to the beginning, for me, it's the basics, like what in the world is it from a bankruptcy point of view? I heard Gary talk about how the author, the artist, retains the copyright, so they own it and might get a continuing royalty in the future. So it struck me that from a bankruptcy point of view, it's the right to look at something. It's the right to have access, unique access to code. So if I'm a bankruptcy judge, the first thing I would look at in NFTs that are caught up in a bankruptcy is it an executory contract? Is it or is it an IP license? What is it? And bankruptcy practitioners know that Section 365 of the Bankruptcy Code treats executory contracts in a very specific way and treats IP assets and licenses in an even more specific way. So just issue spotting, that's the main thing that strikes me about NFTs, is if they really get caught up, like it strikes me that it's a contractual type arrangement rather than an ownership, like an actual asset. That's the one thing that jumps out at me.
And of course, there's oodles of valuation issues and disputes on the horizon for NFTs, which will be another issue that we'll see in bankruptcy a lot. Mo, I wanted to address your question about whether the SEC has any wisdom on any of this. And I'm not sure it does, but it's an interesting question. And the SEC has really started looking closely at NFTs, but more in the context of, are they being used almost in investment schemes to try to raise money, where people are getting like fractionalized interest in an NFT, and so they're pooling together fund money for that purpose. And so when thinking about that, they're looking at it in the context of, it doesn't meet the Howey test, SEC versus Howey, about whether or not a digital asset like an NFT is going to be deemed to be a security for purposes of is whoever's promoting whatever this investment program is adhering to the securities regulations. And the Howey test, just for everyone's benefit, so the following criteria are used to establish whether an investment contract is a security transaction subject to the securities regulation. Number one, does it involve an investment of money? Number two, in a common enterprise. Number three, with an expectation of profits, mostly from the efforts of others. So while cryptocurrency, NFTs, other digital assets may themselves not be a security, an investment program in a fund that's handling these assets and that's giving people supposed fractionalized interest in them may be deemed to be securities. That all kind of leads back to the same question. Well, what if that investment fund ends up in a bankruptcy proceeding? So it's not an exchange, but it's this investment fund that has promised people that they own, 0.0002% in a particular NFT, right? So if that investment fund ends up in bankruptcy, do they actually own an interest in the NFT, or are they just going to be an unsecured creditor of that investment fund? Again, might come down to the fine print, might come down to what the contract provided, but interesting questions that we have not yet seen any answers to.
Right. Yeah.
I will second that. The regulators are all over this right now. They're paying very close attention. And the really interesting thing to me, because I had to deal with securities accounts, what is a security, what is a customer lot in Lehman up to the Second Circuit. And the fascinating part of the crypto universe is that the SEC is saying, and the CFTC are saying, well, some products look like securities based on the Howey test that Kathy described. Others don't. And it's this weird fact-based thing of, well, are you investing? Someone else is doing stuff and then promising you a return. And some crypto accounts look like that, like the earn accounts in Celsius and Voyager, and others don't. Others, you're not sort of relying on someone to do something with your stuff and make you more money. But that's not a very bright line. So you literally have to look at product by product, account by account, maybe even NFT by NFT to see, well, might it be a security or might it not? And in bankruptcy land, this is a hot issue in the big cases right now, because literally whether Celsius and Voyager can emerge from bankruptcy and whether as a business or whether someone wants to buy their business may depend on whether they have to be regulated or not going forward. What are they going to offer? Is it going to be subject to registration? That changes the whole economic model. The crypto universe loves not being regulated. It's part of their philosophy and their religion. But now people are saying, this is a nightmare. Maybe we need regulation. But what that does is it increases costs, of course, to do a registration statement, all that stuff. So it's really fluid and it affects everything. It affects whether they'll survive or not. It affects everyone else. Like, was it BlockFi, I think, that got hauled up by the regulators for selling unregistered securities in a similar earn program. And they said, okay, we quit. We'll register, we'll stop offering unaccredited investors, and we will change our business and we're going to be clean going forward. So that's one way to deal with it. Celsius and Voyager did not do that in time. But now how are they going to get out if their entire business model has to change? So
Right. Yeah. One thing we can be certain of is that there are a host of new issues and new topics of discussion that we're just going to have to wait and see what the authorities and the regulators say about. One last question that I wanted to ask you all before we turn to questions from the audience. What is your bottom line for everyone? Based on what you've seen, what you've read, what you know, what is one thing that you'd want to inform your clientele about when they're dealing with digital assets? Gary, we'll start with you, Gary, and then we'll go to Kathy and then Robert.
Okay, I would say two quick things. One to highlight on what Robert and Kathy mentioned about copyrights. So there's a common misconception that when an NFT is sold, the copyright is sold with the NFT. So the seller or creator maintains ownership of the copyright. The purchaser merely has ownership of the NFT, the digital asset. They have the right to display it and to resell it, but they don't have the right to duplicate it. So that's one. Two, with the metaverse and all of its elements, many marketers and advertising agencies, they are now making it standard part of their marketing plans to include an NFT and a metaverse strategy. There's, as you know, with the metaverse and NFTs, there's a lot of community that can be facilitated through the interaction with the NFTs and the metaverse. And so what you're going to see is more and more companies engaging in metaverse and NFT strategies as a way to continue to build their businesses.
Thank you.
So, I spend a lot of time speaking on and thinking about how investors can best protect themselves and hopefully avoid investing in fraudulent schemes. So I think about that issue, this issue in that context. So, I mean, there's of course the generic advice that I have that if the returns are really, really outsized and you're just being asked to either put your cryptocurrency in an exchange or an investment fund or put cash in and buy an interest, and you're being promised regular 5% returns every whatever week, month, how is that happening, right? And so maybe consider not investing or understanding a little bit more. One step beyond that, I guess, in this context, in this digital world, is if you really want to be safe, as Robert and I both discussed, you want to keep control of your own assets. You want to keep control of your public and private key, and you want to keep it not linked to the internet, so in a cold wallet. The risk in that, of course, is that if you lose your information, it's forever gone. I read that 10 or 15% of all Bitcoin is just lost because people lost their key information. So that's why most people choose to put it in an exchange. It's just easier. You don't have to think about it. Someone else is keeping track of how to access it, and that's all good. It's all good until the exchange ends up in bankruptcy, as we've talked about today. So if you really want to protect yourself, then you want to keep that stuff offline and you want to keep control of it. Just don't lose it.
Yeah.
I was going to say something very similar to Kathy. At the risk of being flippant, if it's too good to be true, it's probably not. So, but that doesn't mean, don't invest in risky assets. People do all the time. Just to understand the risk. The hard part about what's happened with crypto this year is people thought they had one thing and they found out they didn't. And so they overinvested. And so if you have the time and really want to hire someone to help you do it, look, like I said before, look carefully at the contracts, understand where it is, what you're giving them. Is it on a hot platform? Is it at risk? Is it commingled? Or is it off the platform in a cold wallet with a custodian that's at a separate entity who's governed by some state licensing regulation, something like that? Just really do your homework, understand who you're dealing with, because it's not just what is your crypto asset, it's where is it and who controls it. You just understand it before you jump in.
All great points. Thank you all. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A box. Like I said, for any of you in the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now. We've got one question that's referring to the nodes in the blockchain. So I'm guessing this one's for you, Gary. How does one prevent a criminal third party from gaining access to 51% of the nodes in order to change its blockchain's rules? Seems like a danger in smaller cryptocurrencies.
Great question. The difficulty would be, remember that this is a global operation, so the nodes are all over the place. So this is the true definition of decentralized. It would be extremely difficult to control 51% of the nodes. So that's why so many people trust the blockchain, because it is decentralized, it is transparent. So great question. I'm not sure that that actually could happen.
And we've got another question from regarding bankruptcy crypto. Have you seen service for process in bankruptcy cases for crypto delivered by way of NFT drops?
Fancy. I have not.
I have not, but it makes me think of a similar question that lawyers are already geeking out over in bankruptcy land, which is DeFi. DeFi, tell me if it's right, Gary. I mean, smart contracts, these aren't people. These are software, I think you said. And so or DOAs, what are those things called? The units that are sort of self-running. So if they're not represented by people and they're not located anywhere, how do you serve them? It's like if it's only online, only as a bit of software, and they end up owing you some money, how do you collect? It's going to be an interesting issue. I do not know the answer yet.
Yeah. And I think that's all the questions that we have so far. So assuming that the panelists don't have any other last points they'd like to make, I'll get into the wrap. Anyone? All good? Okay. So that concludes our panel. I want to thank the panelists for taking the time to appear and share their knowledge with us. Thank you to the audience for your interest and your participation. I hope you learned something today. I just have one more announcement to make before we close. For those who are interested in these sorts of issues and discussions, whether it be crypto and bankruptcy, bankruptcy in general, the BHBA's bankruptcy section is actively seeking members. We meet once a month, we develop programming like the panel you saw today, and we generally work to promote the bankruptcy bar in Los Angeles. We're actually planning to have a mixer in West LA in early October, so please be on the lookout for an email from us. We'll have good drinks and good conversation, so we hope to see you there. Aside from that, thank you for attending the panel, and hopefully we'll see you in October. Thanks, everyone.